All right, today I want to welcome back Scott Springer. This is his second appearance on Leaders and Legacies. I asked Scott to come back because Scott focuses on something that's very passionate to me, and it's the basic belief that we should be doing more manufacturing in the United States. And just for reference, the number two exporter in the world is Germany. And I'm not upset that the Germans did that. Good for them. But if a country the size of Texas can be the number two exporter in the world, we should be focused on how we're number two, how we pull ahead of them and either number one or number two. And Scott has some amazing thoughts on that. He is the founder of the Chelwood Consulting Group. He's a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy. And Scott has turned around a number of factories and made them profitable. And so we're going to talk today about bringing U.S. factories back to the United States. So if you are somebody who needs manufacturing, please listen, because this is the roadmap. If you're somebody that has a factory and maybe you currently have things offshored, part of Scott's message is do it sooner rather than later. So tune in. Scott, welcome.
Oh, it's great to be back, Craig. Thank you.
Yeah, so we were chatting, and one of the things that we were talking about right before we hit record is things are changing in China.
Yes.
And so everybody's been assuming, hey, China's place to build, but things have been changing. What's been changing in China?
Well, I mean, one thing, they got a lot of banking issues and stuff like that, which I'm not too familiar with, but the average wage in China over the last few years has been going up quite significantly. Where it used to be like sub dollar an hour, US dollar an hour wages, they're up to like $4 an hour, and it's continuing to grow. I'm not exactly sure what the percentage, but it was double-digit growth last year in their average wage, right? So
Yeah.
they become less competitive in the open market,
Well,
for that type of work.
and when I think about, $4 an hour, I mean, sure, that's a big difference that between, the 15, $16 an hour, or whatever's being
Yeah.
paid in the US, but it's not that big of a difference. And there's a cost. There are additional costs for manufacturing in China over the US, and it would seem like that would quickly consume that difference.
Yeah, a lot of, not all the factories, some Chinese factories, they make high quality product, but usually there's a quality issue with stuff coming from China. And then you got the transportation, you got to ship it from there to the US to bring it in. Where they still will be competitive, as long as they have the lower wages, when you're making a lot of widgets, whatever you're making, and they're small and they're high value widgets like smartphones, like they make a lot of the smartphones are made in Taiwan and, South Korea and all that. You could put a lot of smartphones on one container so that your transportation cost is so low per smartphone or per widget, whatever they're making over there, that's like really small. That's when they become very cost competitive, when you have a highly manual process with a small, high value product.
Mm-hmm.
That's hard for us to beat in the US, but almost any other category, I don't, it annoys me that we're not like dominant in so many areas. You mentioned Germany, right? Germany's number two exporter, and their average wage is higher than the US. So why are they exporting more than us? The main reason is the quality of their work is so fantastic. I've been to Germany, I bought Japanese and Northern Italy and basically that Central Europe area, from, Denmark through Holland, Switzerland, Northern Italy, Germany. They make fantastic stuff, very, very high quality, very precise, very high precision equipment. They do it right. The quality is fantastic.
Mm-hmm. So what is it? So quality is one of the things. What are the other things that allow Germany to be number two and remain competitive there?
They automated. Like a lot of their stuff is automated. And in order to run the automation, you need like technical people. It's not high school grad only, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the workers there, they've gone through trade schools or tech schools. they've learned how to work the automation. They either learned it in high school at a tech school, or they went on afterwards and, got trained for a couple years afterwards. If you're the U.S. high schools, I think a lot of them do injustice to the students because they're not necessarily preparing them for jobs. Remember back in the 50s, I don't remember the 50s, but back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, there was a lot of technical schools in almost every county where students can go and they could learn trades, or at least the beginning of the trade. And those are almost all gone.
Yeah, obviously, I grew up right across Chesapeake Bay from the Naval Academy. And to this day, there is a VOTech that's a part of the high school. And it's a separate building. And for the people that go the VOTech route, they spend half their day over at the main building doing English and all that sort of stuff. And then the afternoon or the morning, depending upon what they do, they're over there learning how to be electricians, plumbers, you name it.
Yeah. A lot of those schools have shut down across the US.
Yeah.
Right. And so now the factory workers coming in, they don't understand electricity, they don't understand electronics, they don't understand computers, and how programming works and stuff like that. And that should be taught, for people who want to go down that road.
Yeah, I live in a school district now. Obviously, I live in Austin, Texas, and I live in the Lake Travis school district. There's no VOTech there, and that's, basically if you're going to Lake Travis, and it's kind of crazy. Texas has this rule: if you graduate in the top 10% of your class, you can go to one of the premier state universities. Not for free, but you get admitted to that.
Automatically admitted, yeah.
Yeah. Well, the problem is, if you graduate from Lake Travis High School with a 4.0 average, you're not in the top 10%. It's just insane, but that's the skewing of that district. And so they're not putting out people. I mean, obviously there's some very bright students there, but not all of the students from that school should be going to university. And that's not a dig. It's just different skills. I mean, my goodness, a lot of the millionaires today are plumbers.
Right. Oh yeah. Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah.
It's the schools, the schools that, that don't teach that stuff, right? And then they encourage people to go to college, which is great. College is fantastic. I learned a tremendous amount in college, but it depends on what your major and what your goals are in life. If you get a liberal arts degree, you're very limited on what you can do when you graduate with a liberal arts degree, versus graduating, from the electrical union trade school or the plumbers trade school, the union trade school, or going to a community college. They're building this big manufacturing and technology center at Elgin Community College, which is near my house. And it's to train people after high school to go on, get an associate's degree or get certificates on doing robotics, doing electronics, doing electrical work and stuff like that, which is the community college is becoming a trade school. And it's a big campus, this little community college. I drove through it the other day and I was like, why is this place still a community college? I mean, this place is the size of some universities. It's amazing. And a lot of community colleges are doing that around the country, is they're picking up the slack that the vocational schools dropped in high school, but now they're learning it after high school as opposed to in high school. If they would have learned some of it in high school and then went on to the community college to get their certificates and their associate's degrees and bachelor's degrees in some sort of technology, they'd be so well prepared for the factories. And that's a lot what they do in like Germany and Italy. I talked to them there. It's like they're getting people out of the tech schools, the tech universities, the technical institutes that they have there, where they learn how to work in a factory.
Yeah. And there's an element of focus. So I don't want to get too far off from this, but when you were talking about that, what community colleges are doing, it took me back to my first job out of college. I was working for Ericsson, who made mobile phones at the time.
Okay, yeah.
And I remember seeing some people walk through the Ericsson engineering facilities, the R&D facilities. And I asked somebody, I said, who is that? And they said, well, they're with Wake Tech, the local community college. I said, why are they here? And they said, they're here to figure out what type of technicians we need.
Yeah.
You know who I never saw walk through our hallways? Was anybody from North Carolina State University, the premier engineering school 15 minutes away.
Right.
They weren't walking through our hallways figuring out what we needed to have better engineers. It was the community college
Yes.
that was there figuring out what we needed. And I
Yeah.
think it's a loss of focus on the things that matter.
Well, we haven't kept up in the United States. The community college is starting to catch up, but we haven't kept up with the progress of technology over the years. I mean, the technology is advancing so fast, whether it's software and other stuff, and we've done a great job with the software side of technology. I mean, we lead the world with software right now, but the hard manufacturing, the making of widgets, we fell behind. Over the last 20, 30 years.
Yeah, so let's kind of jump back there. I mean, for years I heard the mantra, we're no longer a manufacturing economy, we are a service economy.
Yeah.
And that was what I heard as I saw manufacturing jobs go overseas. Was that right? What was that wrong? What's the real picture? What should we have been saying?
Well, I agree with the statement back. You're talking about like 10, 20 years ago when manufacturing was moving overseas 30 years ago. Yeah, I agree with that statement. It was moving offshore. But the reasons why is, I think that was not portrayed accurately. We just didn't keep up with technology. We didn't automate. We didn't, when you get into manufacturing and you're selling widgets, around the world. And also, we become more of a global economy. The whole world has become a global economy as opposed to local. When you're local, it's like, you're not going to go overseas. But when you can like ship stuff around the world relatively cheap and easily, the supply chains are so diverse and so much better than they were 30, 40 years ago. The containers moving overseas, it's unbelievable how much gets moved in and out of all the ports around the world. But we just fell behind. We got comfortable is what it was, as opposed to staying ahead. It's like you win the Super Bowl. How many people won their second Super Bowl back to back? Not many over the
Yeah.
year, because they get comfortable, right? No one's three-peated yet.
Yeah.
There's been a couple, repeats, but it's just people get comfortable. And when we were number one in manufacturing, we got comfortable. We didn't think, because when you're number one, you're a target. Everybody wants to be as good as you. Japan became the best manufacturing, country in the world back in the 80s and 90s. They were the best. They were incredible, right? And Germany caught up. And now Germany and Japan, they still make fantastic widgets, whatever they're making. But we got comfortable. We're like, we're USA, made in the USA. It's like, yeah, but let's make the best product. Let's make the best product at a lower price than somebody in another country who's making a not best product, and that's how you stay on top.
Yeah.
Make the best product at a lower price, delivered to the customer.
So we are where we are.
Yeah.
We've and the reshoring effort has started. There's already some things coming back. And one, I guess let's start here. What's driving the reshoring from your perspective? What's driving, the return of American manufacturing?
I think we are getting better. We're starting to catch up to the best companies, best countries, right? So we're starting to make higher quality product at a lower cost. A lot of times American made, we always had very good high quality product, but we didn't necessarily have it at the lowest cost. We're getting better and getting smarter at making it at a lower cost than we were 20 years ago. 20 years ago, we would just throw bodies at a manufacturing process and didn't automate. There was some automation in some places, a lot of the food plants, the big food plants, like, the Krafts and the Nestle's and all that, they were highly automated. But other places, it was still a very manual process. So when it was manual, it's easy to beat that price. Wages go up every year, cost of living adjustments at least, and merit adjustments. Wages are going to be going up. So your costs are going to be going up every single year. When you automate and you start reducing the amount of people you need to make a widget, that amount per widget that the price goes up is a lot smaller and therefore you become more competitive.
Mm-hmm. Now, there are some people that are listening to that and they're saying, well, if I'm going to lose my job to a robot, what's the difference between me losing my job to a robot and me losing my job to somebody in China?
See, I never took it that way. Whenever I worked in plants and automated, my goal was to make sure that the people there always had a job. And it was up to my competitors to make sure that they didn't have their people lose their job. I protected my people's jobs, right?
Mhm.
So when you look at the country as a whole, we want to protect our manufacturing people. We don't care if Chinese factories lose labor because their business goes down. We care about the US manufacturing companies being competitive worldwide. Because, we're not just competing against other US manufacturers anymore. We're competing against worldwide manufacturers. So we want our manufacturing companies to be the best,
Mhm.
right? And I always had a rule in all my plants, when I was automating, when I was upgrading and making places more efficient, no one would lose their job because of, improvements in the plant, right? They might lose their job if sales went down. So let's make sure our costs are low enough so that the jobs don't go away. But if people left on their own for whatever reason, they retired, they decide to go work somewhere else, they lost a job due to attendance, whatever it is, you generally have a little bit of turnover. We might not replace everybody. We might not always have 100 people in the plant, but no one will lose their job because of improvements made in the plant. And I always had that rule in my plants. And that gets the buy-in. People aren't worried about they're losing their job, right? And it also creates that confidence that the job's going to be there long term. If our plant can produce at a lower cost than other plants, the people in that plant have some job security.
Right. Yeah. One of the things that we talked about before was the environment in the plant. And you asked me, been, I've been to factories overseas, and I've been to the Samsung factory in Gumi City where they make Samsung phones.
Okay.
And at one point, multiple times while I was there, I ate at the cafeteria. We were working, and then we went to the cafeteria and had dinner, and then or
Yeah.
lunch and what have you, and then went back to work.
And the cafeteria, the factory workers were eating there, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. You don't see that much in the US, right? We have lunchrooms where everybody brings their own lunch or they could buy a lunch, right? And I think we talked about this, on another conversation. I've been overseas too. You saw it at the Samsung. I saw it down in South America and in Europe at a few factories I've been to. It's like where they take care of their employees better. They create a better culture. They take care of their employees. They feed them. There's lunches and meals provided. Sometimes it's a subsidized, like 1/4 price, but they feed them, they take care of them so that they're well fed. You don't see that very often in US factories. Like I was in a factory just a couple weeks ago, small factory, not going to say the name, obviously. And one thing I wanted to see was I saw that they were having problems with turnover, and I looked at their lunchroom area, and it was a dump. I mean, it was like this rickety old fold-up table, rusty metal chairs, plastic chairs that the people had to sit on. And it was like kind of like out in the corner of the factory. It wasn't like a air conditioned room. So like in the summertime, it was like 90 degrees in the in the lunchroom. It's like, who wants to work in that environment?
Yeah.
It's like it's not nice. It wasn't nice at all.
Well, so picture me as the MBA coming to you with my spreadsheet saying, hey, we're spending too much on cafeterias.
Yeah.
We need to cut here. As an MBA using spreadsheets to make the decision to not do that, what would be your counter argument that you would make to me saying, no, 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 you need a better lunchroom?
How much are you spending on turnover?
Boom.
How much are you spending to hire people? What's your turnover rate? Because turnover rate, there's two costs to turnover. You got the cost of turnover, the cost to rehire. HR people, recruiters, whatever, paying for that. There's a cost associated with that, and that's a hard cost, right? The
Yeah.
other cost is the efficiencies in the factories. Like it takes, I would say, like I ran a lot of packaging lines over the years. and I ran refineries too, and, distillation plants and stuff like that. But like on a packaging line, which I'm more familiar with, it takes a good year for a factory worker to become very proficient at that line. They might be able to operate it by themselves in a couple months, 2 months, not like a week, even though some places they do that in a week. But it takes a good few months for them to be able to operate it on their own without a whole lot of interaction. It takes a good year for them to become really proficient at that manufacturing line. Well, if you're turning people over, if you got a double-digit turnover, or some places triple-digit turnover, you never get to that point where the operators are proficient at their lines. You see that in the efficiencies, the overall equipment effectiveness, the OEE, right? When you got higher turnover, you have lower OEE. The longer people around, you see that OEE climbing just naturally. The efficiencies on the line climb as people are there and they know how to run the line.
Yeah.
It's not just having a procedure. They actually know the idiosyncrasies on how to get a few extra widgets out per minute or per hour, depending on what they're doing.
Yeah.
The turnover kills plants.
So let's talk about bringing manufacturing back to the US. What do we need to do? And one of the things that you talked about, you said there's three types of plants. There's union plants, highly manual, and non-union automated plants.
Yeah.
First off, why does that matter to this discussion? And then how do we tie that into have more manufacturing in the US?
Yeah, we'll start at the top, like the union plants, right? And I worked in a couple union plants. Some of them are automated, some of them are not. If they're not automated, they're swimming upstream. They're not going to be around for long, right? So a lot of the union plants, unfortunately, that shut down over the years, it was a very manual process where they had like an army of people all under the union that were doing a lot of manual work. A lot of those factories that I've seen over the years, they fight the automation because the union, they want to keep their population higher. There's a lot of strength in that. But at the same time, it's a poor strategy because they're competing against other companies that are not doing it manually.
Well, John, that happened in your neck of the woods with John Deere here just somewhat recently in the last several months.
Yeah, they moved over, it's like it was, from what I heard, they were resisting automation, and so it's like, oh, well, we'll go somewhere else where we can automate, and it's not a matter of the hourly wage. Unions always fight that, oh, we want to keep the hourly wages higher. It's like, that's not been my experience. It hasn't been higher than the factories that I worked at, which were non-union factories. I worked at two companies and where we had union plants and non-union plants. And at both of those companies, the non-union plants' hourly wages were higher than the union plant hourly wages. But the performance of the non-union plants far exceeded the union plants at those companies. Not every company's like that, right? There's some phenomenal union plants out there, but it's just a different mindset, I think. It's like you got to think long term. You can't think this year's membership dues. You got to think, we want to be in this factory for 50 to 100 years. What do we need to do to stay in here? Right.
In the John Deere case, they went from having, a handful of union jobs to 0 union jobs, and the factory moved to Mexico.
Yeah. Yeah. Making the same product, just more automated. When I was running one plant, I had one of my operators, he was saying, he's like, I was working at this factory and I forget what they were making. They're making something. And he's like, yeah, they shut down our plant and they moved it to Mexico. He's like, okay, and I dug into it a little bit more. It wasn't because of the wages. They had a dozen people running their manufacturing line, or 15 people. They had quite a few. They were in a union and they were resisting the automation in that plant, right? So they couldn't automate it. So they had like 12 to 15 people. So they built a new plant in Mexico, right? But they automated that line. They had 4 people running the same line, making the same product down there, where it took 12 to 15 people up here. Why? It wasn't the wages. It was a lack of automation.
Yeah. So dealing with the union plants, what's the path forward for them?
I think, and there's two, you get the I think the trade unions do a fantastic job. They train their people for their job and then they protect their jobs, right? So I think they're fantastic. Whether it's electrician, the pipe fitters, the plumbers, the carpenters union, they do a great job. Best in class. Like everybody should model, the other unions, the factory unions should model themselves after there. If they can get them to the factory unions, if they can get them to have like a trade school, like a factory trade school, or get something in their contracts where they only hire people from the community colleges that have gone through the tech programs there.
Mhm.
That would be fantastic because you're raising the caliber of the person in there, and they got to support the automation, right? Too often they're fighting the automation and the improvements of the factories, and if you're doing that, you're a dinosaur. It's like you're back in the 1950s and 60s, and it's right now it's 2024. It's like if you're not automating, if you're not increasing the number of units you can make per hour with less people not working harder, sometimes they like get rid of people and they work harder. That's not the way to do it. It's like I always tried to automate my plants where we were making more widgets, right? And the people on the line, we had less people on the line, and the people on the line were working less hard than we had it before the automation, making more money, right?
Yeah.
You're making more money, you're not working as hard, you're working smarter, you're making more widgets, your total cost go down. It sounds simple, but it's like, it is hard, to figure out how to do that, what automation you need in each factory to make that happen. But sometimes you got to like think out of the box, you got to just go with a blank slate sometimes and figure out how to do it.
So that's union plants. What about non-union automated plants? What's the path forward there?
I think keep going the route, keep automating. You always have to look at efficiencies and quality, right? Sometimes they have automation and they buy the cheaper automation, which doesn't run as well. But you want to make really good product. Your product has to be your quality percentage needs to be 100% or 99.9999. Deming, always try to hit Six Sigma, which is like 1 in a million defects,
Mhm.
right? Always trying to strive towards that. Very seldom do you hit 1 in a million, but always be striving towards it as much as you can. I think people get comfortable. I remember a couple factories, there's a thing called AQL, acceptable quality limit, you know? And it was like, when I walked into the factory, I was like, why are we trying to manufacture to acceptable quality limit? AQL is normally 2%. So it's like 2 out of every 100 is bad. And they're saying that's fine. It was like, no, you got to change your mindset. That's the wrong mindset. You can't be manufacturing to AQL, right? You got to be trying to manufacture towards Six Sigma as much as you can. And
Yeah.
most people, you can never achieve it. There's too much variability, but you get as close as you can, and at least be better than everybody else in the industry or closer to Six Sigma than everybody else in the industry. Then you have a really good shot of, being cost competitive and quality competitive to other companies.
Years ago when I was in semiconductors, we were shipping parts to Siemens, and we were shipping them in 3 frequency bands was the original definition. Then another project came along. They said we want this 4th frequency band, and so we actually used our knowledge of the Germans and their rigid adherence to schedule and all that.
Yeah.
And we asked them, we said, okay, for us to incorporate this, are we allowed to change the schedule? And they're like, no, it's the schedule, the schedule cannot change. It's like, okay, in that case, we won't be able to meet the same requirements in this 4th frequency band that we meet in the other 3. And they're like, that's okay. So we were understanding the way they went. And so I sat down with our product testing team, our product verification team, and we were going through the spec, looking at what we were going to sign up for. And it was so bizarre. Our product engineer kept trying to sign up for more stringent specs than our statistics showed that we could support. And I'm like, now I was using 4.5 Sigma. I said,
Yeah.
Scott, we don't sign up for anything tighter than 4.5 Sigma. And he kept on, our product engineer kept trying to sign us up for stuff tighter. I'm like, no, we have agreement from the Germans that we specify what we can.
Yeah.
And so we went through every single thing. We signed up for 4.5 sigma. We had 100% yield on those parameters.
Yeah. I mean, what's 4.5 sigma is going to be like 1 in 100,000, right? You know, roughly.
Yeah.
And the one or two that slipped through probably didn't have an impact.
Yeah.
You know, it might have been so far off that it didn't have an impact on, you know, the final product or where you're shipping it, or no one noticed it, right? But at the same time, you know, you're a 4.5 sigma, you're shipping 4.5 sigma, right? What can you do? Like, companies can't get comfortable there. You almost got to, like, what can we do to get to 5 sigma? Where's our potential gaps at that point? A lot of times you go in the factory, it's like the gaps are glaring. You know, they're everywhere. You can see where the quality defects are coming from. But once you get to the point where it's like you're at 4.5 sigma, it's like, what can we do to get to 5 sigma? You know, and if it's not cost prohibitive, do it. You know, do that little tweak to get to 5 sigma. Now, if it's $1 million to get to 5 sigma, it's like, yeah, probably won't do it, right? But if it's, you know, $1,000 upgrade to a line, or, you know, a slight tweak in a procedure, do it. Get to 5 sigma.
Yeah.
Keep pushing the envelope up, you know.
So we've talked about union plants. We've talked about non-union automated plants. The one we haven't talked about is highly manual plants.
Yeah, that's one where I don't think you can compete long term, you know, unless you automate. I've been to a few factories where it was people are making minimum wage or very low wages, right? And it's a very manual process, right? The problem with that is when you get that low wage, highly manual process, the only way to get out of that is automating. But if they're at minimum wage and there's enough people to fill the jobs, which in a lot of places there's, you know, sometimes there's tens of thousands of people willing to work for minimum wage. You can't justify the automation. You know, you justify the automation because you either can't produce or you're replacing people. You know, that's the justification. Or sometimes it's an electricity or energy savings by having, you know, automation. But when you get that low wage, it's hard to justify automation, financially justify. So some people will automate to stay in the business long term. But sometimes, you know, at that point, it's almost like your strategy is like, well, we got about 3 more years and we'll be out of business, even though we're doing great now, because somewhere else they're gonna, you know, there'll be manual work somewhere else that'll be fine.
Yeah.
You know, those are the ones that should go overseas. You know, when you got, you know, an army of people in a factory doing manual work at a minimum wage or just a hair above minimum wage. I was at one place where most of the people were at federal minimum wage and the leads were 25 cents more an hour. It was not a high quality work crew. You know, the work was an interesting place to work. You know, I learned a lot while there, but it was like not a place that I wanted to work long term. You know, I like the automation. I like people like taking pride in their work and like the work that they're, you know, the equipment, and they love their equipment they're working on versus like just manually doing stuff, you know, as fast as you can. Because at that point, when you get that, you know, high number of people, low wage, it's how fast they can work only.
Right.
You know, there's no, the equipment's not determining the speed, it's the people determining the speed.
So something else I think we have to think about, and that is policy. And, you know, one of the stories I've shared with you from my past is, you know, when I was in the semiconductor industry, I had a product that just cost too much to make. And we were totally manufacturing it offshore. And at one point, I got a quote from an assembler in Colorado, and they were charging half the price we were paying in Asia to assemble the product. Which was, so first off, this was approaching 15 years ago. No, this was more than 15 years ago. So this was 15 to 20 years ago. At least on that product, we could assemble it half the price in the United States as we were paying in Asia.
Yeah.
And when I was able to find that, and it was a manufacturer, it was an assembler that I'd worked with before. They had done high volume. I, I trusted them immensely based on my prior experience. And when I came out with that price, management said, well, let's run it through the cost model and let's look at it. And so I went and found the financial guys. They kept them in the basement there. And and they're putting it through the cost model. And they said, Craig, we need to change your tax rate. I'm like, what? They said, you're currently paying a 5% tax rate on your profits because all of this business is going through our Singapore office. We're going to change your tax rate to 35%. I was like, why is that? And they said, because it touches US soil. When it touches US soil, it has to be taxed at the American corporate tax rate.
Yeah.
And that just, it infuriated me that we had a tax policy that made it advantageous to ship jobs overseas. It wasn't because the American worker wasn't competitive enough. It was because of our tax policy shipped it over, encouraged the offshoring.
Yeah.
And a number of years ago, that tax rate came down from 35% to 20%, but that's about to expire and it's going to go back up to 35%. And so, you've been talking about the processes in the factory, which people need to start doing. But we also, as voters, as business owners, we need to advocate for tax policies that encourage U.S. manufacturing.
Yeah, tax the people, don't tax the businesses. Allow our businesses to be competitive internationally,
Yeah.
right? Because it's like, you're either gonna do one of two things. Like Eisenhower did this back in the 50s. He set the corporate tax rate so high on purpose so that corporations were forced to distribute that money to dividends to the people and reinvest in their businesses. It's like he almost didn't want companies to make money.
Right.
Right. And, it's like small businesses, like I was, talking to a small business just not too long ago. And it's like they made sure they made no money every year as a business because they didn't want to pay the taxes.
Right.
So they reinvested in their business or funneled it to the employees and the owners and stuff like that, just distribute all the money and, as distributions and, stuff like that, make sure they made the business itself, it was a C Corp, made no money.
Right.
Right. So you either have the tax rate so high so that people need to take that money and push it out into the economy, because that's what you're doing when you're doing that. When you're giving it to the people, when you're investing in the business, you're supporting the economy more. If the corporations are giving it to the government, I mean, you take 35%, say you got a $10 million company, 35%, or making $10 million, $3.5 million. What's going to provide more benefit to the economy? The government spending $3.5 million, or that corporation taking that $3.5 million and funneling it to new equipment, training, employee wages, employee bonuses, stuff like that.
Yeah, and the fact is, the reason we were running our profits through Singapore, we spent millions of dollars creating that entity in Singapore just so we could save tax. And that's the problem is, people are creative. They find ways to work around these taxes, and who gets hurt is the American worker. Exactly. And I would say more broadly, America as a whole. So I tell you what, as we wrap up, we've covered a lot. Do you have any parting thoughts for businesses in terms of whether they are a consumer of manufacturing or whether they're a manufacturing company? What are your parting thoughts as you look ahead?
My biggest parting thought, there's two things. Take care of your people. Create that great culture so that people want to stick around. That'll help improve your manufacturing profile in general. The second is if you're not automating, either with, software, AI, or mechanical, robots, automated equipment, there's a lot of different types of automation you can do, automated forklifts or whatever. If you don't have a plan in place over the next several years to automate, I guarantee you somebody else does.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you don't have that plan in place, and you can, whether you act on it or not. Somebody else does, and within a few years, people are going to be passing you up because all the tools are out there for people to utilize. All the there's fantastic automation nowadays. You know, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, the types of automation compared to 20 years ago. Like when I got into manufacturing 25 years ago, you know, and the automation was pretty cool back then, but it doesn't even compare to the stuff that's out there today.
Yeah.
You know, it's no comparison. It's so much at a lower cost. You know, it's like, and it runs better, and it's amazing what's out there nowadays.
Well, I hope anybody that's listening, whether you're a consumer of manufacturing or whether you have a manufacturing facility, I hope they make it their mission. I hope you make it your mission to make America the number one or number two exporter in the world, because we can do it.
Absolutely.
And Scott, I think you've laid out a brilliant roadmap. And I hope people will call you, and because you actually help. We didn't talk about this. You know these things because you actually help companies put them to work, and you make you make their factories profitable. So,
Yeah.
so for those listening, call Scott. Call Scott. Get started. Scott, how do they reach you?
My email is probably the best, Scott@chelwoodgroup.com, CHEL woodgroup.com, Chelwood Group. Chelwood Consulting Group is my company. There's a bunch of us who do different things for factories, make them more efficient, run better, faster, you know, lower cost. So
I hope you get very busy, because I want to see America become a great manufacturing powerhouse that we once were.
yeah, we can definitely do it. We have all the tools, we have all the abilities. It's just a matter of executing and making it happen.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that, Scott.
Thanks for having me here, Craig. It was a good time again.